Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share scary Wendigo horror stories. First story, Wendigo. I grew up in the northernmost part of Wisconsin on a Native American reservation. As a Native American kid, you grow up learning a lot about the mythology of our people, many mythical creatures and spirits. But I was always pretty skeptical, especially when it came to the monsters like Bigfoot or the Mishibiju. But all of that changed one day. It was mid-December, and it was freezing out. Had to be around -10 Fahrenheit. My friend David and I were at his family's house for a dinner. After the dinner was finished, his grandmother asked us if we would go to her cabin and chop some logs. She was going out there while her husband went hunting, and she wanted it to be nice and warm. Of course, we told her we would. What else could we do? So we throw on our jackets and boots and headed out. It wasn't less than a mile if we went straight into the woods instead of walking the road. So that's what we did. Trekking through snow that is at times thigh-high isn't fun in the best of situations, but as I said, it was like -10. When we finally arrived, we went inside and started a fire with a few remaining split logs and warmed up a bit. The crackling flames were peaceful, but David kept pacing and looking around uneasily. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me that he felt like he was being watched. I told him that was ridiculous and that we should start chopping wood before it got dark, so we got the axe and went outside and began to chop. We were doing that for about an hour when we first heard it very faintly. It sounded like a girl screaming. We thought it must have been the wind, so we went back to the logs. A few more minutes went by, and we heard it again. This time there was no mistaking it. A girl was yelling for help. Then the wolf howled. We looked at each other and ran in the direction of the scream. We got to a spot where all the snow was packed down and there were paw prints all around. We began to yell for her, try to get her to answer. That is when I heard the noise that haunts my dreams. The only way it could be described is an angry, hateful shriek, and it was close. David started running before me, but I caught up pretty quick. I was mentally kicking myself for leaving the axe back at the cabin, but that is where we were heading. Once we got back, we would be fine. At least that's what I told myself. It didn't quite work out that way. Before we could get into the cabin, David fell. I turned to help him up, but he wasn't there, just a long drag mark. I yelled for him, but got no response. I started moving in the direction of the mark. When I got hit, I didn't see what hit me, but I sure felt it. I was knocked off my feet, and my chest felt like it was on fire. I glanced down and saw my jacket was shredded and blood was everywhere. I couldn't breathe. I felt myself about to pass out. Then I saw it. It was tall, had to be about 9 feet, covered in thick, dirty white fur, a mouth full of fangs but no lips, clawed hands covered in blood, and its sunken eyes were pale yellow. I didn't know what it was, but it no longer mattered. I was losing blood quickly. How could I survive this? When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My chest was bandaged, and there was a police officer by my bed. When he saw that I was awake, he asked me what happened. I told him everything. He told me that they found David's jacket and boots in the woods, but there was no sign of him. The doctor told me that I was attacked by a bear and that I had hallucinated from blood loss. Eventually, I recovered enough to be released. As far as I know, they never found David, and I haven't gone in the woods since that day. Second story, when it rains in the woods. It's raining again. To be honest with you, I'm terrified of rain. I never leave the house when it's storming outside. But to give myself some credit, I never used to be like this. I used to love watching the rain fall from outside the windows, but now I always have my curtains pulled tight across the edges of the windowsill. I wish I could show you what made me the way I am, partly to warn you, partly to verify myself. But I can't. I can only write out my story like it's some sort of fantasy, as if it's just another bizarre story on the internet that deserves to be forgotten in a week. If you see it like that, then that's fine, but I won't forget. I'll never forget. In 2012, I was a 21-year-old college student. I was absolutely madly in love with nature and all things wild. I had spent my childhood roaming up and down tree lines, fantasizing about mythical creatures and fantastic monsters. Now, there I was in 2012 as an adult, studying forestry with dreams of defending those tree lines and fantasies I held so dear. I was absolutely ecstatic when my professor announced an opportunity for some extra credit. He suggested that we spend a few days of our upcoming break walking along some trails and paths to remind ourselves why we were doing what we were doing. As an avid hiker, I knew of a hiking trail a few hours over from our town that offered plenty of room to walk with very little crowding. The only ones who really walked more than a few minutes down the trail were the park rangers, and the chances of seeing one of them on the ever-winding and expanding trails of the forest seemed small. "Hey, Lily, want to take a trip down to the preserve with me?" I asked as the bell finished tolling, signaling the end of the school day. The girl next to me, Lily, was a quiet and sweet girl. She had long brunette hair that stretched just past her shoulders and gentle green eyes. She was the type of person who people admired from afar. Beautiful, but silent. A passing joke or compliment would make her smile, but she'd very rarely comment back. To most, that'd make them move on to the next person. To me, that made me want to be closer to her. We've been friends for a while at this point. Whether or not any sort of romantic intent was had between us, I couldn't say. We just knew we connected on some sort of level. "Yeah, of course. Just tell me when." She looked into my eyes with a soft smile on her face. I smiled back at her. I hoped this trip would turn out well. A few days passed. Lily and I spent our free time in stores gathering food, supplies, and tents together. Soon enough, we were all packed up and ready to head out. We took my small car with our bags tied down on the roof and took the highway a few hours east. By the time we got there, it was mid-afternoon, still plenty of time to walk, but also a bad time to find parking. There was plenty of people here walking their dogs, setting up lunches, and walking the paths. "I thought you said it'd be quiet?" Lily asked with a slight snicker. I rolled my eyes in response. "I'm sure these kids aren't planning on hiking a few days in. It'll get quiet, I promise." I spun around and began taking our large packs off of the roof of the vehicle. For as big as they were surprisingly easy to carry. Lily slipped the straps over her shoulders and waited for me to start heading towards the park. As we approached the trail's entrance, we saw a ranger loosely standing guard. "You guys heading in?" he asked. There was no hostility or caution in his tone. He was just merely asking a simple question. "Yeah, that's all right?" I questioned the fit middle-aged man. "Of course, just let me know your names and take my card. If you need anything called down to the station. There's a couple ranger shacks deeper in. Feel free to use them if you need to, just make sure to clean up." The ranger gave a welcoming smile and handed me a small business card for the local ranger station. "Thank you. Oh, and my name's Max, this is Lily." Lily gave a small nod at the ranger, and he nodded back respectfully. "Well, Max and Lily, you enjoy yourselves out there. We'll be patrolling around, so if you see us, don't be scared to say hi." With those words, the ranger backed away from the entrance, and we began our trek. We spent half of the first day slowly walking in quiet appreciation. There's something so liberating about walking with no time limit. It's like all of the world's stress slides right off your back, and the only thing you have to worry about is yourself. In that exact moment, you're all that matters. No bills, no studies, no cares. Just avoid snakes and strange plants, and you're all set. It wasn't long into our journey before the sun began to nestle itself behind the trees, and the warm, but steadily dropping temperature of the late afternoon's winds began sweeping under our sweaty clothes. "Let's find a clearing to settle into," Lily said, her head tilting from one direction to the other, looking for a place to set up. I nodded in approval and saw a small opening further down the path, clearly made by others who took a similar trip. It only took a few minutes to set up our tents in the clearing and to start a small fire. After all that walking and hard work, we were finally ready to be off our feet for a while. Lily plopped herself down on the opposite side of the fire I was sitting at and pulled out a granola bar to eat. I felt a rumble in my stomach and pulled out one of my own. "This place is really beautiful," she said, taking a large bite out of the bar. "Yeah, haven't seen many animals yet, though." I unwrapped my food and placed it on my lips, ready to take a bite. I quickly glanced over at Lily and froze. In the increasingly darkening forest just off the trail, just behind Lily, was something about the size of half a football. It was cloaked in the darkness, but I assumed it had to have been some sort of small critter. I began to squint my eyes, trying to focus on it, but whatever it was seemed to fade out of existence, going straight into the ground. "Everything all right?" Lily asked. I realized it must have seemed like I was staring at her with food half in my mouth. I laughed and shrugged, shaking my head softly. "Yeah, sorry, I thought I saw an animal or something off in the woods. It was small, could have just been a rabbit or something. It must have burrowed into the ground, though." My friend peered over her shoulder into the silent woods and looked around. I knew she wouldn't see anything, whatever it was, left as quickly as I caught sight of it. We ended up finishing our meal, extinguishing the fire, and climbing into our separate tents. I slept like a log. All of that walking put me out like a light. It wasn't until the morning that I woke up. I stumbled out of the tent, nearly tripping on the small fabric ledge at the exit of my portable shelter. The hot and humid summer's morning sun hit my like a pile of bricks. "Just so you know, I think we need to watch out for snakes," Lily said softly while I was wiping my brow. I looked over at her to see her undoing the tent's supports from the forest floor. "Did you see one?" I asked, bending down and following suit with the camp cleanup. "I think so. I heard something rubbing on the bottom of my tent last night." I opened my eyes, and the indents on my walls looked like a pretty thick snake trying to wiggle its way in. She didn't seem bothered by the potential late-night visitor, so I kept her warning in my mind, but continued on. As our journey went on, we realized that every step we took, there was another blotch in the sky. Somehow a storm was brewing overhead that none of the forecasts we had watched warned us of. "How much longer until it rains?" Lily was interrupted by a large thunderclap nearby in the clouds. I felt the earth tremor below us before a few raindrops began falling from the dimly lit sky. "Thanks, Lily," I said, arching my head towards her direction. She scoffed, and I laughed. The rain was little more than a small drizzle at that moment, but it was clear it was going to get worse. "Let's hurry and find a place to set up." I watched as she began to increase her pace, slowly moving from a walk into a jog, heading deeper down the trail. I followed suit right next to her. For a while, it seemed like we weren't going to find a clearing anytime soon. We were already on the verge of being considered undoubtedly drenched, and to our luck, at that exact moment of thought, another strong explosion of thunder erupted from above. This time the floodgates were opened. Rain began to fall with a purpose and with enough force to erupt on impact, splashing everything nearby with the drop's watery contents. "Hey, right over there," I heard Lily yell out, just barely audible through the thunderous rain. She was running off of the main path down a small side trail nearby. I looked at where she was heading and saw a small cabin. I ran off the path with her. With each step, more and more mud thrust itself against my legs. I increased my speed, hoping to catch up to my light-footed friend, but something caught me off guard. The tip of my foot slid underneath something, and my momentum carried me downwards, face first into a mud bath. For a few seconds I was dazed, just laying down in the running muck pit. I eventually looked down on my feet and saw what looked like a thin tree root also caked in dirt erupting out of the ground. But as my eyes kept on the root, those initial assumptions fell to the wayside. The shimmering of the mud is what made me realize that whatever this object was, it was moving just beneath the mud. Then it clicked in my head. The snakes Lily had brought up, I had just tripped over one of them. I felt a shiver cross over my back, and I jolted back up to my feet and continued on my path, abandoning that snake behind. Without another incident, I made it to the cabin doors and busted inside, finally free from the hurricane-like storm. "Wow!" A familiar voice rang out in the shack. I looked over to see a drenched, but otherwise clean Lily staring at me with an amused smile on her face. "Decide to have a wrestling match out there?" "Haha, funny," I said, looking down at myself. Mud was dripping off of just about every pore of my body. "I think I met one of your snakes you mentioned out there. It decided to give me a little trip." "Oh, really?" Lily said as she grabbed me and turned me around, searching the pack on my back for something to help me clean up. "You were right, they're pretty thick. I wonder what kind they are. I can't imagine them being venomous being that wide." I felt the hands of my companion yanking out fabric from my pack. I took some time to look around the cabin as Lily pulled the towels free. It was wooden, old, and completely empty. There was a cooking stove off to one side, but other than that it looked very sparse. Clearly, it was only meant for a quick one-night stay. Here, get yourself cleaned up. I turned back around and Lily handed me a bundle of towels. I immediately wiped off my face and brow. The dirt was already starting to dry and stick to my skin. Thanks, I replied to her as she began setting up her things. I put my pack down against the door and walked over to a window, still wiping myself down. I watched as the rain continued its assault on the earth, the dirt running like rivers down the valleys and trails, both natural and man-made. It looks terrible outside, I remarked. I heard a small groan of acknowledgement come from behind me. I let my eyes trail over the forested wetland, over to the path we took to get up here. My body locked up when I saw something right where I tripped. Something was protruding from the ground like a small pillar. I rubbed the inside of the window fruitlessly to clear off the fog and obstructing rain. I could barely make out what looked like a thick, partially submerged branch broken off on one end with small twigs splintering off skyward. Hey, come and look at this. I called out to Lily, who was still fondling around with her bags. Is it the snake? She asked, rising to her feet. I don't think so. It looks weird, though. I watched the mud-coated object get hammered by rain as Lily approached and peered outside. Is that a broken tree root? She suggested. I could only shrug. Whatever it was wasn't moving. Wait, Lily chimed in again. Look at the color. As more and more of the rain ran its way down the object, the less obstructed by mud the object became. I narrowed my eyes, pushing past the raindrops on the window, and noticed exactly what Lily was talking about. Whatever was under that mud was a pale shade of gray. Oh my God, Lily gasped and grabbed her mouth. What is it? I turned and looked at her, my eyebrow upturned in confusion. Look at the end of it, she said, holding her breath. I turned my gaze back outward and focused in. I felt my heart drop. Fingertips. It was an arm reaching out of the ground, still as the grave. Oh my God. My voice wavered slightly. We should call the Rangers and get them out here. Where's their card? She asked, hand extended towards me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wet but legible business card. Without hesitation, Lily snatched it out of my hand and began dialing the number in. Hello, I'd like to report something on one of the trails. She paced back and forth on the squeaky cabin floors. I turned and kept my gaze on the hand. It looked petrified in place, fingers eagerly reaching towards the sky, letting the water rush over it. We're at she began to stutter. We're at, I heard the voice on the other side of the phone chirp up, and Lily nodded. Hey, Max, can you take a step outside and tell me what number's next to the door? I peeled my eyes away from the hand. I felt an increasingly oppressive air pressing its way inside the cabin. I shook my intuition away and walked to the door. I opened it up and stepped outside. I peered towards the arm and could see it more clearly without the blurry window between us. It was hairless, smooth, and the fingernails seemed clean and trimmed. The water that gushed over it almost seemed to vanish on impact, as if it was some sort of sponge. I had to force my eyes away from it to view the number on the wall. 17. I took a deep breath, repeating the number in my head before the sound of a loud clap echoed off behind me. I jumped slightly on edge. I turned back towards the direction of the arm and saw nothing in its place, just the mud quickly running down the trail. I swallowed hard and rushed back inside. The number's 17, but I think the arm fell back into the mud. It's not there anymore. Lily's eyes went wide as she relayed that information over to the dispatcher. It wasn't long until she pulled the phone away from her ear and hung up. They told us to stay put and that this storm's not going to pass anytime soon. They said they've got a ranger on the way and the police have been informed, but it might take them a while to reach us out here. I bit my lip and looked back outside toward the empty path. I hope it didn't get dragged away by the current. I mumbled. Lily came up right beside me, joining me at the window. I'm sure they'll be able to follow that mud slick down to wherever it goes. On the bright side, that rain cleaned you up a bit. She gave a reassuring smile, and I looked down at myself. My clothes were still riddled with mud, but the rain on my skin seemed to have washed away most of the dirt. I guess that's always a plus. I said stoically, "Come on, Max. Let's make ourselves at home at least. I'll just lock the door in case, well, you know." Her voice trailed off. "In case there's a killer out there?" I mumbled at her as she walked over to the door and flipped the lock. She turned around and averted her eyes from my gaze, choosing instead to continue her mission of getting set up. After a few minutes of silence, we had our food laid out in front of us. We had agreed that once the ranger gets here, our little expedition was over. We had seen more than enough in just the past 2 days than we could have in a lifetime. "Let's eat and try to get some sleep," I said, chowing down on some extra rations. Lily nodded and joined in on the feast. With full stomachs, we set up for bed. I noticed my friend kept looking out towards the darkened windows. I could feel tension in the air. "Everything all right?" I asked. Lily shook her head dismissively. "I just feel weird, like I'm being watched." "I'm sure it's nothing, but just to be safe dash." She ripped off her pillowcase, then mine, before walking over to the windows and draping them over the glass as makeshift curtains. "I just don't want anything looking in at us while we sleep." "I don't blame you." I made my way to my bedroll and caseless pillow before lying down, trying to get comfortable. Lily did the same. It was a few hours into the night before I heard Lily's hushed voice. Max, wake up, do you hear that?" I opened my eyes less groggy than I expected and met Lily's gaze. She was staring at the wooden door of the cabin. I spent a few seconds watching the door before I lightly saw the handle of the door jiggle. Someone was trying to get in. "What do we do?" Lily asked. I was speechless. "Maybe it's the dash." Our whispered conversation was interrupted by a loud knocking coming from the other side of the wooden door. Bang, bang, bang. I jumped to my feet. It's got to be the cops. I began my slow, meticulous walk to the door. "Who's out there?" Silence. "Hello." I yelled again. Abruptly, the banging started again, loud enough to drown out my voice. I took a step back from the door and kneeled close to the ground. Each impact on the door rocked the wooden frames of the small cabin. I watched as one of the pillowcase curtains began to slowly slip off the window. "No," Lily whispered, tears in her eyes. I rushed over to the window just as the fabric fell and was met face to face with the darkness outside. The banging on the door stopped suddenly. I very carefully kneeled down and grabbed the fabric in my hands to toss back over the window. Thud! Appearing out of the darkness was the palm of a hand. It slapped the window with a heavy force. I could only see the pale palm in the shroud of blackness outside. I quickly threw the pillowcase back on the window and backed up to Lily. She was shivering, her eyes wide with fear. "That was the hand, Max. That was the hand that was outside earlier." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I wrapped my arms around Lily for as much my comfort as hers. Thud, 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 thud. The wet palm of the hand kept slapping against the glass. I could hear ripples of cracks spreading along the window pane. I squeezed onto Lily as she balled up and kept my eyes focused on the pillowcase covering the glass, hoping it wouldn't fall and expose that lifeless arm again. With one last thud, it stopped. A light shone through the fabric of the window mere seconds after the attack halted. I could hear the struggling sounds of wheels rolling up towards the cabin. I let out a sigh and a prayer that the Rangers had finally made it. With the sounds of the wheels stopping just a few yards away, I finally heard a voice call out from the void outside. "Lily? Max? You in there?" The voice sounded familiar. It was the Ranger from the day prior. I slid to my feet, dragging Lily with me. "Yeah, we're inside, but someone's out there," I yelled. I rushed over to the door and opened it to see the Ranger standing stiff off in the middle of the small opening in front of the cabin. He was facing us, but the light from his rover coupled with his hat covered his body in intense shadows. His body seemed rigid. "Come out of that box, and we'll get you home," the Ranger said. His voice seemed different this time, disjointed from his body. I stayed quiet. Something was very wrong here. "Step out of there. Now." The voice grumbled, unrecognizable from earlier. "Are you all right?" I called out a little more than a whisper. "Of course I am." Can't you see my smile? The ranger tilted his neck backwards. His hat slipped from his skull, which allowed the light from behind him to illuminate his face. His eyes were wide and full of both pain and fear. His lips were quivering in shock. I backed up more into the doorway and watched as two impossibly long fingers trailed their way from behind a ranger's head and made their way across his cheeks to his mouth. They slid inside with little resistance and began pulling his lips outward in a mockingly gruesome smile. Then they kept prying. I watched as his lips strained with the force of the fingers inside of his mouth. His lips became white with the stress placed against them before a shower of red erupted from his mouth, parting the centers of his lips like sliced meat. "I'm so perfectly happy," a voice called out from just behind the ranger, its voice thick and unnatural. I looked for the source and froze. There, right next to the ranger's feet, was a half-submerged human face dug deeply into the mud. Its black, cold eyes shone from some unknown source. Whatever this was a monster of the strictest definition. Its gaze was so vastly separated from humanity that there was no common ground between us. As I locked eyes with this thing, human in shape and deviled in eyes, I saw the ranger fall into the mud. Just behind his head was a long spider-like arm stretching out of the ground, seemingly changing its size and shape as if it only faintly followed the laws of this reality. The ranger's body twitched and spasmed on the ground as more and more lifeless hands began to slither out from the mud, wrapping their hands around his body. I was so thirsty, but now I'm so very hungry. The submerged head called out unblinkingly towards me. Without another warning, the ranger's body was ripped under the earth and devoured by the mud. The ground where he was shifted and bubbled over like a small eruption. The creature's eyes stared at me with a deadening gaze. It was observing me. I let out a small chirr from my mouth. Without changing expression, the head effortlessly started gliding through the earth towards the cabin, fingers and arms popping out from the earth around it like fins from shark. I had stored enough courage to slam the door shut and lock it before running back over to Lily, who saw the whole thing. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head and slumped down next to her. "I don't know." We sat in silence until the sounds of scratching came from below the floorboards. Hundreds of fingers tearing away flesh to the bone tried to burrow their way upwards. All we could do was sit in the corner furthest away from the windows and pray they didn't get to us. That night, we watched as the floors pulsated upwards and downwards as the foundation began to crumble. Those arms were going to drag us, and our wooden coffin downwards into the earth. I didn't know what to do. I sat there as the floor cracked open and mud crept up through the seams of the boards like blood flowing from a vein. I sat waiting to die, but Lily had other plans. She grabbed my hand and yanked me up my feet. She stared at the door for a split second before sprinting off with me in tow. She bursted open the door and ran towards the ranger's vehicle. Luckily for us, the ranger never shut it off before the earth took him down. We both hopped on its seat and zipped off the path back from where we came. I hazarded a glance back towards the cabin to see it crumbling into the ground, but there was something else there. Still half submerged on the path mere yard away from us was that unblinking head. Its black eyes shone dead set and emotionless on our escape. We kept driving and driving for God knows how long, until we hit some other rangers who were on a scouting mission up to us and their missing comrade. We told them everything we could, but the looks of disbelief said enough to us. We were labeled as emotionally distressed and unreliable witnesses. The powers that be listed the disappearance of the ranger and the cabin as accidental by case of mudslide. Now, every time it rains, I wonder if somewhere out in the woods, a single head peers out on the trails waiting for someone to pass by, a million hands waiting just below the surface to drag them down into the earth. Third story. There's something in the North Carolina forests. You might be thinking by the title, of course there's something out in the forest. Deer, bears, chipmunks, etc. I know that, but there's something far worse than any of those animals. I live in the Brevard area of North Carolina. It's a nice town, well, the only town I could afford to live in. My work is located in Waynesville, and it takes a bit of a drive to get to it. In the afternoons after work, I like to take the Parkway route home. It's peaceful, especially after a long day. Of all those times I have driven on those roads, not once have I felt uneasy. But the other day, I was absolutely terrified. It was a beautiful afternoon, the sky setting with a pink hue and the air crisp. I had driven my motorcycle that day, knowing the weather would be nice. I was almost off the Parkway, passing through several tunnels. There's one tunnel that stretches for what seems like forever. Pitch black, no other lights except my single headlight. I got a sudden chill, the hairs on the back of my neck rising. I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, slightly speeding up. Out of nowhere, someone or something jumped out onto the road. It stopped for a split second, locking eyes with me, and then disappeared down the side of the mountain. I kept going, heart thumping so loud I could hear it over the rushing wind. I finally stopped at a gas station far away from the Parkway. That animal, or whatever it was, had looked at me with so much intent in such little time. From what I caught, it stood on 2 feet like a human, but its facial features weren't. It had pale, almost bleach-white skin with no body hair of any kind. The thing's eyes were slightly sunken in, and it didn't have a mouth. What was there instead were these long, tentacle-looking things. The hands and feet were like a chicken's, but more meatier. I know what you're thinking. You might be calling me crazy and going to click away from this story. That's fine. I'm writing this story for myself and others out there that have seen this thing. That night, I didn't get any sleep. I tossed and turned, still thinking about that creature. Sometime during the night, I heard strange noises outside my house. I tried playing off as one of my neighbors messing around in their yard, but I knew what it really was. The following week, nothing happened. No sightings of that creature, nothing. I tried researching articles and news sites if anyone else spotted this creature. I didn't see anything promising, just scared people mistaking a bear for a monster in the woods. It seemed this creature, whatever it is, didn't exist. Well, I knew it didn't exist because there was no creature or animal that remotely looked like that. But that was only the calm before the storm. I had rode my motorcycle that day to work, thinking nothing of the week before. As I got closer and closer to my work, I felt eyes staring at me. The rest of the day, I felt paranoid and uncomfortable. All my coworkers seemed to avoid me. I was afraid if I told them, they would label me as crazy. My boss had made me stay later that day, well into the night. As the few people that stayed longer went home, I stood by the entrance of the building. I stared out into the parking lot and at my motorcycle. Dread washed over me, and all I wanted to do was turn around and go back in the building. I knew I couldn't and stepped out, fearing my fate. The drive back home was eerily silent except for the first sound of my engine. There were no other cars on the Parkway. I began to feel more and more uneasy as I started going through the tunnels. I got to the long tunnel, speeding up. As I neared the end, I saw a shadow standing there. I tried to maneuver around it, but it step-sided and yanked me off the motorcycle. I flew through the air, landing on my stomach, all air leaving my lungs. I watched as my motorcycle skidded across the road, sparks partially lighting up the tunnel. I gasped for air, trying to push myself up and run away. I tried to stand, only to feel misshapen claw-like hands grab my ankle. I screamed and shook the hand away, running as fast as I could out of the tunnel. I stopped at my bike and reached down to pick it up. Doing so, I heard a wailing scream emit from the creature. I snapped my head back towards it, heart dropping. It was slowly making its way to me, like it knew I couldn't get away. Suddenly, it stopped. I turned back around and saw a car driving up. The car stopped, the driver rolling down their window. They asked something along the lines of if I was okay. I waved them off, looking back at the tunnel. I caught a glimpse of the creature, slowly lurking back into the dark tunnel. The driver that came upon me called the police and ambulance. They took me to the hospital, where I finally realized my injuries. I had road rash on my arms and legs, and my jeans were torn in several places. My adrenaline was gone, and I felt my body become tired by the hour. Every bone in my body felt sore as I sat there in the small room, waiting to be released. A nurse signed off on some papers and told me about my bill. I cursed, knowing this visit was going to cost me. Better costing me money and not my life. As I made my way to the entrance of the hospital, I saw that thing waiting for me in the parking lot. Fourth story. There's something wrong with the deer. I recently moved into a house that is backed up to woods. The woods are thick with birch and beech and pine. Miles of wooded nothingness, colored with browns and greens, fall-time reds and springtime yellows. But the forest to me seems only gray, like a forgotten tombstone from centuries past. The woods are silent, as if devoid of life. In the night, its gray bones, when bathed in moonlight, appear like prison bars caging something in. Something that lurks within the deep blackness. Something sinister. The woods, though, are not absent of wildlife. There are deer, and despite their presence, bring no noise but the rustling of leaves. This is not a home I chose, but rather inherited. Gifted from a grandfather I barely knew. My father's father. He'd left when my father was just a boy and remained in his life through letters, and not much more. I was next on the inheritance list after my father passed, so here I am, living in a home that I might as well have inherited from stranger. The house itself is rustic, wooden, and modern, if that makes any sense. Modern in a sort of angular way, with large windows and minimalist wide-open spaces. The house isn't new, though. It's over 50 years old. There's a sizable back deck that I had initially thought would be a place I'd spend a great deal of time. Reading books, drinking coffee, and letting my worries drift away as I listen to the woodland sounds. But the woods are the reason I don't go back there anymore. My coffee was warm in my hand as I stood on the deck one morning, not long after moving in. There was a light fog out. It was quiet. At the edge of the woods, a deer appeared where it stood without crossing into the open. It stayed there looking at me. This went on for several minutes. Then the deer turned and disappeared back into the foggy forest. It was odd, but not terribly so. That is, not until another morning, when the deer appeared again and did the same thing. Standing at the edge, staring, not taking a single step outside the woods. Perhaps I'd spooked it, I thought, and went indoors, where I watched from behind a glass door. But still the deer stared at me. I moved to the bedroom where the blinds were closed and carefully lifted one a touch, and to my surprise, the deer had shifted itself so that it could continue to watch me. There was no hiding from this deer, it seemed. As I looked out at him, I began to feel very uncomfortable, as if I were staring into the eyes of something more than animal. The deer turned and disappeared into the woods. Each morning following, the deer would be there at the edge of the woods, watching. "You can come out of there," I said to it. I had an idea and went inside, grabbed a handful of grapes from the fridge, and tossed them into the yard. The deer's gaze never left me. It's not polite to stare, you know. For several more minutes, the deer watched me, then turned and left without touching the offering. Later that day, I visited a hardware store, went up to the register and asked the clerk, "Do you sell any deer feeders?" The clerk looked at me a moment, cocked his head, and asked, "What do you want that for?" The answer was obvious, I thought. To feed deer. "Do you have deer in your yard?" "Well, kind of. There's one that keeps coming right up to my yard, but never leaves the woods." The clerk was silent a moment, then asked, "Where do you live?" "Why does that matter?" The clerk narrowed his eyes, then exhaled and smiled. "Sorry, we don't have any deer feeders." That night, after having just finished dinner, I stepped outside with a drink in hand, hoping to gaze at the stars and listen to hooting owls. There, of course, were no hooting owls when I stepped outside, and because of clouds, no stars either. I sighed and took a sip of my drink, looked toward the woods, and noticed two glowing eyes. The deer. This was the first time I'd seen the deer at night. I stepped to the end of the deck and yelled, "What do you want?" The deer did not budge. I set my drink down and descended the stairs and into the yard. Still, The deer did not move. I stepped closer towards the deer. I'm getting pretty sick of. I paused. There were more eyes. More deer. About 6 total, standing side by side in the woods, staring at me. I slowly backed up, returned to the house, and locked the door. Deer don't open doors, I know, but something just wasn't right. Locking up provided some semblance of safety. I stood at the window for 15 more minutes before they finally left. The next day, I went back to the hardware store, which sells guns as well, to buy a rifle. I'd settled on a Remington 783 hunting rifle. Before handing me the gun, the clerk asked, "Do you plan on using it locally?" "I don't know. Hunting ain't allowed here." I looked up from the glass display case. "What? Never." The clerk shook his head. "Never. Then why do you sell hunting rifles?" "Our customers don't hunt locally." I sighed. "What's the big deal?" The clerk stared at me a moment, then leaned forward. "You're thinking of shooting the deer, aren't you?" "No." "Then what?" "I don't know. I want it just in case." The clerk straightened back up, turned around, and returned the Remington to the rack. "I can't sell you this gun." "Hey, wait. Why not? You might misuse it." I was growing irritated. "That's ridiculous. Just sell me the gun." He stepped from behind the counter and held his hand toward the door. "We're closed now. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I looked at my watch. "It's only noon." "We close at noon today." I coughed a frustrated laugh. "You've got to be kidding with me." The clerk was straight-faced, his hand still held toward the exit. I rolled my eyes and walked to the door. The clerk followed, and as I exited, he warned, "Leave the deer alone." He locked the door and flipped the sign in the window to closed. I went home that day and waited, checking the back window every hour, and when night came, the deer had returned. I grabbed a flashlight and a golf club and stepped outside and into the yard. "Go away," I yelled and whacked the ground with the club. The deer didn't move. "You heard me. Get out of here." Again, I hit the ground with the club. I shined the light along the edge of the woods and could see all 6 deer. "Go!" Whack. No response. I flung the club toward the deer, and it collided with a nearby tree. The deer did not flinch. "What?" I muttered under my breath. Deer are infamously jumpy creatures, and here was 6 of them, not reacting at all to me chucking a golf club at them. I stood in the yard, heart racing, watching them watch me. Then slowly and all together, they turned and began to walk away. I kept the flashlight's beam on them, and as they moved, it illuminated a 7th deer, but one that was much larger than the others. They trotted past it, and I lifted the beam from this larger deer's legs to its torso and then finally settled on its head. I gasped and stumbled backward, fumbling the flashlight from my hands. The deer had a human face. I quickly reached for the light and pointed it back toward the dark woods, and the beam fell on the creature again, who had now stepped closer toward the edge of the woods. He glared at me from large, human eyes, set into a fleshed, emotionless face. Atop his head were antlers, and his body was precisely that of a deer. He took another slow step towards me without making a sound, not a breath or even a crunch of leaves. So quiet it was as if he were floating. I spun around and sprinted through the yard and up the steps, across the deck, and into the house. I slammed the door, locked it, turned off the lights, and ran to the bedroom window, where I fearfully peeked through a crack in the blinds. The creature stepped to the edge of the woods then, to my utter surprise, continued into the yard. Immediately, I became filled with dread. This thing had left the woods and was walking toward my house. I held my breath and watched as the creature came so close that I lost sight of it beneath the deck. I quickly shifted and searched for the creature, and just before I was about to turn and scramble to another room, I saw the creature's antlers. It was ascending the steps up to the deck, and as it climbed, its head was turned in my direction, eyes glaring at me. I dropped to the floor and hid beneath the window, then shuffled across the floor and out of the room. I hurried into the kitchen, grabbed my keys, and as I ran through the living room, there he was standing at the glass door, looking in at me. I did not stop. I ran out the front door, jumped in my car, and left town. Fifth story. Something absolutely malevolent exists in rural Montana. The jump scares, the monster under the bed, your friend dressed up as a man with a knife, these are all pretty damn scary. But I consider these temporary and/or mild scares, scares that aren't slow. Oftentimes, it's a harmless scene from a movie or a friend pulling a prank on you that elicits a 5-second shriek. True fear, a pervasive fear that slowly eats away at your conscience, comes out of the unknown. The feeling that deep in the depths of darkness, something is going to take you away, that something is lurking in the shadows. It's the feeling that any second you could be dead, the feeling that a pair of beady eyes are staring right at you, but you can't stare back. My journey began in Montana. It was a November night in 2004, and I was en route to Calgary, Canada. My family comes from Canada, and I was making the drive from my home in Billings to Calgary. The main highways were shutting down in preparation for a snowstorm, and few dared to drive out in the impending snowstorm. Me, I was a cocky 20-year-old who didn't give a damn. I figured I was born in Canada. I drive a F-150. I can handle some snowy roads. Rural Montana is eerie at night, especially the back roads. The main route from Kalispell to Lethbridge, Canada, was closed, and I was forced to take a back route, a seemingly endless 2-lane road that probably hadn't been worked on in decades. I remember turning my turn signal on and heading north on that road. It was about 11 p.m., and the snow showers were beginning to turn into a windy, snowy mess, with my windshield wipers just barely clearing off the falling snow. I wasn't worried about the weather, nor the ice coating the 2-laned road, nor the health of my mother. No, I was preoccupied with the feeling that something was behind me. See, the road was entirely straight and cut through a dense pine forest. The road was devoid of any curves, turns, or signs. It was merely a 50-mile-long straight shot through a dense forest. Straight, endless. My brights only exposed the sheer desolation, the isolation of the environment in which I was in. I hadn't seen an automobile in half an hour. I felt exposed, yet utterly alone at the same time. To calm my nerves, I inserted a Toby Keith CD into my radio and cranked the volume up. The soothing sound of country guitar was beginning to relax me. It was alleviating the feeling of unease. About a minute into the song, the track became jumbled. The guitar solo was abruptly interrupted by scratchy sounds. It was akin to nail on a chalkboard. It was absolutely unbearable. As I adjusted the volume, my F-150 lost traction on the ice, and within seconds, I found my car coming to a screeching halt, my hood trapped in a large snow bank approximately 20 feet off the side of the road. I screamed. I turned on my hazards and proceeded to curse like a sailor as I stepped out of the car and into the snowy landscape. The blizzard hindered the visibility to the point where I could hardly see feet in front of me. A ferocious, icy wind was burning my face, and the feeling of unease only grew. I threw on an extra parka and turned my car off. That's when I heard his voice. "Adam," he said. "Adam." It was a voice that absolutely sent shivers up my spine, a voice that caused me to tense up like a marble statue. It was the voice of my father. "Adam, is that you?" I gulped and could barely breathe. My father was a park ranger in Banff, and then at Glacier National Park when we moved to America. When I was 10 years old, he got lost in a snowstorm and was never heard from again. His body was never found, and while the police searched for weeks, he was eventually declared dead. I didn't have time to draw parallels between my situation and his situation, and I let emotion overtake me. "Dad," I continued, Dad, I can't see you. I can see you just fine," it said. "Come a little closer." I froze. The seconds of emotions and adrenaline had abruptly come to a halt. I'm a rational man. My father was dead. He'd been dead for 10 years. Something else was going on. "Adam," did I stutter? "Come with me," it said. "Come with me. It's nice and warm where I stand. Come with me." I still couldn't see who was speaking, and I had no time to play games. I hopped in my car and started the ignition. The damn thing wouldn't start. Adam, your car won't start. It's futile, it said. The voice was distorted this time. It sounded as if my father had the flu, a real deep, raspy voice. Despite the freezing cold, I could feel nervous sweat dripping from my brow. The slow scare I mentioned was sinking in. I couldn't think. My hands shook relentlessly as I tried to start the car. Against my better judgment, I stepped out the pickup truck and ran the opposite direction. I had never run faster in my life. The only force keeping my ass from running out of breath was pure fear and adrenaline. Behind me, I heard it calling my name, its voice becoming more distorted each second. Adam! 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 Within minutes, as the snow relentlessly beat down on me, and as the moon became shrouded by pine trees and snow, I found myself in the middle of a pine forest. Lost completely. Its voice, however, was slowly disappearing. As it faded into the night, so did my consciousness. The cold had gotten to me, and I hadn't realized it. Before I drifted to an unconscious sleep, I slowly put two and two together. It's November, my dad. November, snowstorm, lost forever. Those are my final thoughts before waking up in a Great Falls hospital. Surrounded by doctors, I glanced around me. I was dizzy and dozed in and out of consciousness before finally waking up. I drew a comparison between what happened to my father when I was 10 and the near death I had avoided. I shivered. After minutes of recuperating, the doctor beside my bed explained what had happened. Mr. Redacted, you are a lucky man. You were found unconscious 200 yards away from Country Road. Your body temperature was 88F. I'm amazed that you seemingly won't suffer any long-term effects. Who found me? I asked, completely dazed, still recalling the thing that had chased me. Some man driving to Missoula saw your Ford deep in the trees off the side of the road, your hazards reflecting some light. Minutes later, he heard groaning and found your motionless body in the snow. The doctor continued, I only have one real question before I let you rest and talk to your mother. What drove you to leave your automobile and run into a pine forest in the middle of a snowstorm? He coughed and chuckled as he said, I mean, come on, what happened? Did you see a ghost? As he laughed at his corny joke, I thought to myself, I wish I had seen it. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.